It's Crossover Thursday here in the Locked On Podcast Network, and two 2-0 teams are facing off. Steelers, Chargers. We break it down here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We're your hosts, Chris Carter of Locked On Steelers, David Drogemeyer of Locked On Chargers, and we're breaking it down as we do on both of our shows. But with it being Crossover Thursday, we get to cross over. We get to talk together about this upcoming matchup. Two 2-0 teams that are looking to write their scripts on this season. We'll get into all big parts of this matchup in just a minute here. But first, I want to remind you, this show is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks sponsors all of our Crossover Thursday episodes. And go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL, and you can use all lowercase Locked On NFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Go to Prize Picks today. David, it is an interesting start for both of these teams. Jim Harbaugh, new to the Chargers, not new to the NFL, a well-respected coach. I'd say similarly to Mike Tomlin. You got two teams that are playing a style of football that I think a lot of people were thinking, oh, that's long and dead. You don't play defense first and running the ball and controlling the clock. You play fast. You pass the ball. You throw it all over the lot. And these two teams are punching against that right now. When you look at how these two teams match up, David, it seems to me like they represent the new wave of the NFL that is kind of going back to an old school wave, if you will.
They do say that history has a tendency to repeat itself, and we know that running the football, establishing the line of scrimmage, and dominating time of possession is one of the ways that you can win in this game, and also playing incredible defense, right? That's the other thing that you have to have along with that if you're not going to throw it down the field and attack vertically. And also, when you're able to run the ball, when you do want to pass it and you want to take advantage of that play action, you can do it, and it hits a lot more than if you're just an aerial focused attack.
Absolutely. And you mentioned playing great defense. The number 2 defense in the NFL right now is the Pittsburgh Steelers. The number 1 defense in the NFL is the Los Angeles Chargers. So there's a lot of excitement here. We're going to get into those matchups in a bit, but I want to stay on this topic, though, of being like this, because the Steelers, I feel like, are in a unique position right now where they kind of have to be this way, because you got Justin Fields, young Justin Fields. You're hoping Russell Wilson comes back healthy, but you haven't had a real sling it all over the lot quarterback since maybe even 2018 Ben Roethlisberger. So it's been quite a minute. So you kind of have to win this way, and they've been doing it. They haven't had a losing season. They've been in the playoffs 3 of the last 4 years. That's what the Steelers do.
Pretty good.
Yeah, right. They know how to do that. But the Chargers have Justin Herbert. David, why does Jim Harbaugh subscribe to that style when you got a guy like Herbert who is respected everywhere in the league?
Well, it's all about taking some food and some problems off of Justin Herbert's plate. It's not asking Justin Herbert to be Superman. We've seen he is capable of being Superman. Like we take into account the game last year against the Vikings where he threw for over 400 yards and was just absolutely insane, ripping throws while having constant pressure in his face. But the Chargers had to win that game on a last-second interception because they just could not run the ball. They couldn't control the clock. They had a very, very bad defense, and so they were asking Justin Herbert to be near perfect. When you can run the football, when you can dominate that time of possession, you establish that line of scrimmage, and you're able to keep possession of the ball and ultimately punch it in and score touchdowns, then you're able to assert your will and dominate the football game. And I think that's something that has really been lost, but that's been a calling card of Jim Harbaugh since he started coaching, right? He's always been about ground, pound, absolutely knock down, drag out, fight type of football. Like, he wants you to feel it after you play his football team. And it's a welcome change for the Chargers, who the last several years have not been able to play defense at all. They haven't been able to run the ball at all. And they haven't won a lot of football games, which I think is a direct correlation to the win and loss record for the Chargers.
And I also think you see a correlation between how these two teams have tried to prepare to set up this era, because 2 of the top picks of the Chargers recently, one Joe Alt, one Rashawn Slater. 2 of the top picks for the Steelers recently, one Troy Fautanu, one Broderick Jones, getting first-round offensive tackles making it a priority, making them pillars in your offense for the future to try to get to that point. I do think it's about that. But also on the defensive side of the ball, both these teams boast athletic and talented edge rushers that bring it. They got athletic guys in the secondary, from Asante Samuel to Joey Porter Jr. to Derwin James to Minkah Fitzpatrick. These are two teams that I think have a lot more in common than people realize before they start looking at the rosters. Like, wait a second, these line up a lot.
Yeah, especially on defense. I would say like most regularly, spectacularly on defense. You see a couple of really talented edge rushers on the Chargers. You see a couple of very good edge rushers on the Pittsburgh Steelers. You mentioned the safeties. You mentioned the corners. I think the Chargers have some really young, very fast, physical linebackers as well. And both these defense, like as you mentioned, number 1 and number 2 in the entire NFL. So they are playing fast, they are playing physical, and they are dominating their opponents.
Let's be clear. It's also week 2. This
absolutely
it is subject to change every single week. But I do like what I've seen out of both of these defenses so far. Both of them get after the quarterback. Both of them like to make plays. On the ball. I think that's going to be a huge part of this game moving forward. But again, for the Steelers, I think the one thing that they really need to be careful of in this game, and we're going to get to matchups in a bit, but like the Steelers have to play this way. If they go off track, if the Chargers get a lead, we don't know what it's like for Justin Fields to have to play comeback ball, for him to have to drop back, attack downfield consistently, and not playing off it with the run and getting here and being conservative and letting the defense win the game. The Chargers, though, I think represent a different kind of challenge, because I think you could trust Justin Herbert. And granted, the receivers situation is not what it was a couple of years ago when he was just throwing it all over the place.
Yeah.
Right. How do you feel about this team as it's constructed, the Chargers being able to scrap this style of play that Jim Harbaugh has said, just for the sake of, hey, we got to get to the finish line in this game? Is that something that you're confident about this group doing, or is that something that you're like, I still need to see them do that?
Yeah, I mean, as far as the game plan, like the identity is the identity. They are going to run the football. Like Greg Roman, Jim Harbaugh, they're going to run the ball. Like that's what they do. And yes, we understand the challenge in front of us as far as the Steelers defense. They're spectacular against the run, but the Chargers can't compromise who they are completely based on who they're playing. Obviously, you are going to game plan specifically to beat the Steelers, as the Steelers are going to game plan specifically to beat the Chargers. You have to factor that into account, but I think you have to do that while also keeping in mind your identity and how you want to play football. You're going to have to change it up a little bit. That's going to be one of the things we talk about is you got to be multiple, like especially on offense for the Chargers. Like, if you think you're going to run it into the ground over and over and over and over again against, one of the better run defenses in the league, that's not going to always work out for you. You're going to have to be able to make your throws. You're going to have to be to work on play action. You're going to have to be able to throw it down the football field if you're going to want to win this game, in my opinion.
No, I agree. It's gonna need to be a part of this game. Balance is gonna be the key here. Both teams have a top 10 run defense right now. Both teams get after, like you said, athletic linebackers on both sides, defensive fronts that are going to be challenging. I think that's going to be a huge part of this game. But again, just looking at how it represents kind of what the future is, you see a lot of teams. If you're not Patrick Mahomes, if you're not a team with Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen or Joe Burrow, one of those types of guys, and again the weapons to go along with them, you kind of need to subscribe to a different style of ball. I mean, look at even the Chiefs right now. The Chiefs aren't playing the way they used to with Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce. They're playing a more balanced style of football with the way that they run their offense. And I think that's more to, the fact that they acknowledge, like, hey, we got to play to this different kind of style until we get all these weapons around Patrick Mahomes again. But I think it's interesting that while a lot of people have zigged in the league, the Steelers and the Chargers are trying to zag, and I think that that's a smart approach than trying to fit a round peg in a square hole.
I agree. And also, it's just when you look at the top teams the last 5 or 6 years, those are all teams that have been able to run the ball. They've also had balance, and they've also had very good defenses. It's no mistake that those teams are winning a lot of football games. It's no mistake that Mike Tomlin and the Steelers haven't had a losing season in their entire partnership together. That's winning formula. That's winning football. And like I said, it takes more work off of your quarterback's plate, which is going to be good for the entire football team.
Absolutely. I want to get to more aspects of this matchup. We'll do so next here on Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Chris Carter, David Drogemeyer, stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is also brought to you by Arena Club. For most of us that like collecting cards, the idea of spending $2,000 or more on big value collector items like a rookie cards of Patrick Mahomes, TJ Watt, or Justin Herbert just isn't in the cards. I love collecting, but that's some serious money to drop. Thanks to slab packs from arenaclub.com, now it's possible to score gem mints for a fraction of their retail price. Every card that I listed, it was hit from last week's Arena Club slab pack drop Arena Club. It's the only repack that provides real value, a complete view of all possible cards, and clear hit rates for each one. Arena Club slab packs are revolutionizing the repack game with transparency. After your pulls are revealed, they'll immediately be placed in your showroom for safekeeping, selling, trading, or auction. The Arena Club grading process is accurate, fast, and transparent, with a full grade rationale provided an explanation of how your card was scored. Whether you're buying, selling, trading, or displaying, Arena Club is the card collecting platform you have to check out. Right now, you can get 10% off your first slab pack or card purchase by going to arenaclub.com/LockedOnNFL. And when you get there, use code LockedOnNFL, all lowercase, all one word, and that will get you arenaclub.com slab pack with 10% off. Again, that's arenaclub.com/LockedOnNFL, code LockedOnNFL for 10% off your first purchase. We're back here on Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Chris Carter of Locked On Steelers, David Drogemeyer of Locked On Chargers. David, let's talk about the Chargers real quick. Both these teams are 2-0, but the Chargers kind of come in and they have laid waste to their first two opponents, beating the Raiders 22-10, beating the Panthers 26-3. And it feels like, okay, those were nice, but you want to see it against better opponents. Do you feel like this is the warm-up test the Chargers need before they go face the big bag Chiefs in week 4?
Yeah, I wouldn't say warm-up test at all. I mean, the Pittsburgh Steelers are, a fantastic football team. They're 2-0. We can't even think about the Kansas City Chiefs at all until we are done with the Pittsburgh Steelers. They have our full respect. They have the Chargers' full attention, and they should. And this is definitely by far the toughest test. And let's be honest here. We expected to beat the Raiders. We expected to beat the Panthers. The Chargers did that. We don't have an expectation on if we are going to beat the Steelers because they're a quality football team. Like I mentioned earlier, they have one of the better defenses in the league. And so this is a huge test, especially for Justin Herbert, who is dealing with a little bit of an ankle injury. He is going to play. I expect him to play on Sunday. I don't really feel like I was never really concerned. He didn't practice today, but I feel like he will practice tomorrow. I'm sure he'll practice Friday, but I fully expect him to play on Sunday. But this is going to be a matchup where you're going to have to run the football. I mean, this is another team that is extremely physical, and this is going to be the toughest test for the Chargers on offense. Can they run the ball against one of the better run defenses in the league? Can they complete passes down the football field? That's going to be the big test. The Steelers, third best run defense EPA, third in EPA versus opponent dropbacks. They're doing well against the rush, going well against the pass. They've been a fantastic defense. And so the Chargers going to have to see if their brand of football is going to match up. And also, this is going to be where Justin Herbert's going to have to show up. Like, the running game can't just take over the game like it did against the Raiders, like it did against the Panthers. You're going to have to do both in this one.
Agreed. I think that's the thing is that, balance is going to win the day for either side here, and whichever team is able to find that balance and get the other defense guessing a little bit more, that's the team that's going to win. I also think turnovers are going to play a huge factor in this. Oh, yeah. The Steelers right now, second most interceptions in the NFL. I think that's a huge part of what you're looking at here as far as protecting the football. Right now, the Steelers have the best turnover differential in the NFL, +5. It's simply because they haven't turned the ball over yet on offense. And to me, that's a big key to this too, David, is if the Chargers can force turnovers, it will put this young Steelers offense. When I say young, I mean young. It's not just Justin Fields, who's 25 years old, and yes, he's in his 4th year, but you got Zach Frazier at center, who's a rookie, Spencer Anderson at guard, who's a second-year, 7th-round draft pick, for, a rookie Troy Fautanu in his second start at right tackle. George Pickens is in his third year. You got, Najee Harris at the end of his rookie deal. Jalen Warren still in his third year in the NFL. All these guys on offense, even Pat Freiermuth just signed his extension to, in his fourth year in the NFL. Yeah. This is a very young offense. And so if the Chargers can put pressure on this offense to have to get desperate, that's going to be the first time we've really had to see that this year. And that's where I think you want to say, hey, prove to me that your offense is taken forward. And in the same stroke for Pittsburgh, you want to say, hey, Justin Herbert, I see y'all been really conservative. I see y'all been loving J.K. Dobbins. What you going to do when you don't have him? Do you trust Quentin Johnson to still own the ball in that situation? Can you throw it downfield? Hayden Hurst, those guys? That's what's going to be really interesting. And I also think it's even more interesting, too. Greg Roman, like you said, there's a lot of familiarity with both sides there. Roman knows the Steelers defense. Steelers defense knows Roman. There's a lot of really interesting factors about this matchup.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely going to be hey, Justin Herbert, you're going to have to step up and make some throws in this game offensively. You're going to have to hit Lab McConkey on those in-breaking routes. You're going to have to hit Hayden Hurst. You're going to have to get the ball to Quentin Johnston in space and allow him to get his yards after catch, yards after contact. You're going to have to put your playmakers in position to have success in the passing game, because you're not going to just be able to lean on the running game that's been so successful when you have the leading rusher in the entire NFL with J.K. Dobbins, who is averaging an absurd 9.9 yards per carry and also has 3 runs of 40-plus yards already through 2 games. J.K. Dobbins has been nothing short of incredible so far. But this is it. This is where the real test lies on offense. And then I think on defense, as you mentioned, like the biggest story for the Chargers is, can they smother another offense that's probably still trying to find itself, right? I think with the Chargers, they've held their opponents to 13 total points through 2 games. They have only allowed 2 plays in the red zone the entire season so far.
Man.
Only 2. They've been extremely dominant on the defensive side, and so they're going to have to try to figure out, hey, how can I make the Steelers offense one-dimensional? How can I take away Najee Harris? Can I make Justin Fields throw the ball 25, 30-plus times? That's my recipe for success. That's how I'm going to try to win this football game if I'm the Chargers.
1,000%. I think that you're on the side there. And I think the one thing that's on the Steelers thing that if they make that happen, they have to also take advantage of it, because it's not just we've seen Justin Herbert throw the ball 35, 40 times in games and look pretty good doing it. You've beaten the Steelers with that before. So I think that's certainly part of the equation here. But on Justin Herbert, David, we didn't address this in the first segment because I wanted to get through that, but I wanted you to give a chance. I know Steelers fans, they're not up in tune with what's going on in Charger land, but of course he was, he's had an ankle injury in his last game. There's questions about his availability. Jim Harbaugh spoke pretty, I think, positively about him on Wednesday. What's your sense of Justin Herbert's injury and how soon he'll be back and ready to go?
Yeah, so for Justin Herbert, he got rolled up on a little bit towards the end of that Panthers game. He did finish the game. So I do want to point that out. He did finish the game. He did not leave. But yeah, he didn't practice on Wednesday as we're recording this. But based on what Jim Harbaugh said and reading in between the lines, and also just knowing that Justin Herbert has played through fractured rib cartilage and also a broken finger, Justin Herbert is as tough as they come. He is as tough as nails. I fully expect that, barring a significant setback, Justin Herbert will be playing on Sunday against the Pittsburgh Steelers. I would feel like, honestly, they'd have to cut his right foot off for him not to want to jump in and play this game, because this is it. Like, this is the first real litmus test for the Chargers, and I think for the Chargers fan base to figure out, is this team for real? Is it just a fluke because you beat 2 bad teams, or can they go into Pittsburgh against one of the storied franchises in the NFL and pick up a big win against a really, really good football team? That, I think, is where a lot of Charger fans are looking for that answer.
I think both sides looking for that answer, because whereas, the Steelers beating the Broncos wasn't a whole lot. Beating the Falcons, I think that a lot of people kind of, thumb their noses like, it's the Falcons. But then you see what the Falcons did to the Eagles on Monday Night Football, and it's like, maybe that wasn't a bad team. But either way, you prove it in this game, either side, whoever comes out of this 3-0, they're going to be feeling good vibes about things moving forward, and both sides setting up for big matchups, because while the Chargers play the Chiefs the week after, the Steelers get a rematch with the Colts on the road the next week, their third road game in their first 4 games of the season. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see who comes out of this. But I want to get to matchups, specifically matchups, who lines up where, what things are going to be watching. We'll get to both of those on both sides of this matchup here on Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Chris Carter, David Drogemeyer, stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, remind you, this show is also brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. If you've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, and for good reason. It's America's #1 sportsbook. It gives you all the odds, lines, and ends and odds that you could ever want when you're gambling on any sport. NFL, NBA, NHL, MLB, all those things are available right there. And right now, if you look at the Chargers-Steelers matchup, the Steelers are still favored by a hair at 1.5 points. Money line is set at -120 for the Steelers, +102 for the Chargers. The over-under at 35.5 came down 0.5 point in the middle of the week. But those are your lines that you can make bets on America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel Sportsbook. And right now, FanDuel is doing something a little special for everyone. If you now through September 22nd, so you're running out of days, you better get on this as soon as possible. If you go on FanDuel right now and bet $5, you can get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. Just visit FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We're back here on Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We're not going to get into predictions. We saved that for our Friday shows. That's for that time, and we get to talk with our guests and everything there. But David, let's talk about matchups. That I think we very, very much can do. We're going to do 2 each side. So I want you to lead with your first one. What is the top matchup that you're looking at that you have a circle around and say, hey, the Chargers have to win this one if they have a hope that they hope to win this one?
Yeah, well, I think that the first one's awfully easy for me. I mean, it's your rookie first-round pick, 5th overall, Joe Alt, going up against a defensive player of the year in TJ Watt. I mean, that is a monumental, massive matchup for the Chargers. This is why the Chargers drafted Joe Alt, is for matchups like this, to go up against beasts like him. He did a very, very good job handling Max Crosby in the Week 1 game. Didn't allow any pressures, didn't allow any sacks at all. Did a fantastic job in Week 2. Rashawn Slater, Joe Alt, 2 of the top tackle duos in the NFL through a couple of weeks. Only a couple of teams have their tackle duos that are ranked higher, according to PFF. So that right there is a matchup that could absolutely decide this game, because we know TJ Watt can wreck the game. So Joe Alt has to do his best to try to keep TJ Watt away from Justin Herbert.
And I think you bring up a good point, too, because Rashawn Slater, I mean, again, similar on both sides here. The Steelers have drafted 2 first-round tackles. The Chargers have drafted 2 first-round tackles. Don't sleep on Rashawn Slater just because Joe Alt's the new fancy one there. He's a pretty good tackle, too.
Oh, Rashawn Slater's given up 1 pressure through 2 games. 1.
That's insane.
And
that's
53
insane.
pass blocking snaps. 1.
Exactly. And here's the thing is that I think the Steelers in a lot of matchups, you face a team, they'll have 1 really good tackle. And if that tackle's on TJ Watt's side, guess what? That means Alex Highsmith's on the other and he's bringing heat. But it's rare to see 2 teams with 2 high pedigree tackles. And that's why I think it's a great choice on your part at seeing how that matchup goes. If the Chargers neutralize the Steelers edge rush, that is a huge point in their favor. My first point I'm going to look at matchup here is how they attack the Chargers secondary, because you have Asante Samuel at corner and Derwin James at safety. And those are 2 guys that are highly respected. They're guys that bring a lot to the table. Now, the Steelers in Week 1, they notably did not even try to target the middle part of the field. Why? Because the Falcons had Jesse Bates. They were trying to say, hey, we're not throwing anywhere near that guy. Don't let him be the turnover creator. Stick to the sidelines. Week 2, they said, you know what? Patrick Surtain, let's throw to the middle part of the field now, because he's on the sideline. But now you have a mix of a guy on the outside and a guy that's going to be playing in the middle that you have to honor if you're the Steelers. And that's where I think it's going to be really tricky for this Steelers offense when they want to throw the football. not falling for any traps that the Chargers are setting. And if I'm Jim Harbaugh, I'm trying to mix up my coverage, man on one side, zone on the other, trying to fool Justin Fields into throwing into a situation where one of my playmaker defensive backs can make a play. That chess match of where those guys are and when the Steelers take their shots, I think that's a key part in this matchup as well.
100% it is. There's no question about it. I think, another guy who's kind of been slept on a little bit is the corner that's on the other side for the Chargers. That's Christian Fulton. Christian Fulton has allowed 3 receptions for 1 yard so far through 2 games. He's been ridiculously good. Obviously, that's not sustainable. We know that. Asante Samuel Jr. has given up some yards, but hasn't really given up any touchdowns. So I want to know who's going to cover George Pickens, because when you're looking at the Steelers offense, obviously Najee Harris is going to get the ball. We know that. We respect his ability to ground and pound. He, the Chargers know how good of a running back he is. He's a bruiser, and the Chargers have a guy like him in Gus Edwards, like that. He's our hammer, and J.K. Dobbins, it's like thunder and lightning, right? The J.K. Dobbins is the lightning, and Gus Edwards is the thunder. And we know Najee Harris is a big thunder type of back. He's a big runner. So I think it's who's going to cover George Pickens. Is it going to be Christian Fulton? Is it Asante Samuel Jr.? And how they fare in that matchup, as well as Derwin James on Freiermuth. I think those two right there are the 2 most important matchups for this game defensively for the Chargers.
I hear you on that. I'll switch to the Steelers defense for a second, talking about a key matchup there. We talked about the edge rushers. I think a lot is going to also be determined on the interior in this game.
Oh, no question.
The Steelers have gotten a rejuvenated Cam Hayward. There was a lot of questions. He suffered a groin injury that kind of sidelined him and hobbled him for last year. He's 35 years old. Everyone's like, oh, he's got to hang it up. Well, he went through training camp, and the Steelers signed him to a 3-year extension, and it looks like in the first 2 games,
which I think really raised a lot of heads, right? It was like, really? 3-year extension at 35? But
for a guy
so far, wow. He's been really
lighting
good.
it up. He's been getting pressures. He's been stuffing the run. And he's been joined this year by a healthy Larry Ogunjobi, who's been playing to the pedigree of what he's getting paid in the salary cap. And he's joined by Keanu Benton, who's also playing very well as a second-round pick out of Wisconsin. You have that rotation along with Patrick Queen and Landon Roberts, Peyton Wilson, all active athletic linebackers that fit this mold of, if this is a physical game, that's what they love to do. They love to be physical. I think that, if you go back and you look at the NFL films when they would start to play the big music, when it would just be physical football, you're going to see a lot of that in this game. Linemen getting to the second level, defensive linemen trying to blow up plays, linebackers hitting the hole fast and hard, and running backs having that clash in the hole. That kind of stuff is going to be huge in this game. And how the Steelers' defensive front keeps the linebackers clean, but also gets penetration, that's going to be huge to determine who wins this football game and who wins the ground game, especially when the Chargers have the ball.
I think that's probably the area that I'm most concerned with when I look at this football game is how are the Chargers' interior offensive linemen going to deal with the pure beef that the Pittsburgh Steelers are bringing and the skill level. Obviously, you mentioned Cam Hayward. Cam Hayward is ridiculously good. He's shown it, and he's a guy that the Chargers have to try to neutralize as much as they can. He's going to get his. He's a really, really good player. They just got to try to not let him wreck the game. That's the biggest story, is how is Bradley Bozeman, Trey Pipkins, Zion Johnson going to be able to handle the interior of the Pittsburgh Steelers defensive line? How they handle him might be as important as how Justin Herbert plays in this game, because they can wreck it. They could stop the run and force Justin Herbert to go out there and do what he hasn't done yet in a new offense, which is go out there and air it out. So this is going to be a really, really fun game to watch, a really physical, hard-nosed game for 60 minutes. I can't wait to watch it.
And what's so crazy is we've talked about all these players. We haven't zeroed in on Joey Bosa. We haven't zeroed in on Minka Fitzpatrick. There's so many other really good elements of this game to talk about, and we only got to some of it here. We'll get to more of it in our Friday episodes here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Chris Carter and David Drogemeyer, thank you all for tuning into Crossover Thursday. David, let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Yeah, so you can find me on X at DroTalkSD. Of course, you can find the podcast Locked On Chargers wherever you get your podcasts, and of course, on video on YouTube as well.
Absolutely. He's David Drogemeyer. I'm Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Find me here just like you find David on the Locked On Podcast Network, hosting Locked On Steelers just like he hosts Locked On Chargers on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get either Locked On Steelers or Locked On Chargers or both all day in your YouTube feeds. We're each back Friday with our final episodes previewing Steelers Chargers one more time, getting you ready for the big game this weekend. We'll see you there here on the Locked On Podcast Network.